Welcome back to the Obi-Wan channel. Working here now on the Ford 302 60 over Junkyard Dawg engine, and the next thing I'm going to do here is put on the gear drive. Okay, so a lot of you new guys out there, when I say new guys, I'm talking, you haven't been around this kind of stuff much or whatever. This is kind of the cool thing that was done back in the 60s, 70s, maybe even 80s, I remember, late 80s, early 90s. I mean, it's been proven now so many times as far as like on the dyno that these things will soak up your horsepower. I wouldn't necessarily say by a lot, but it doesn't help. Let's put it that way. They're noisy and annoying and just, all the bad and wrong reasons really why you shouldn't put it on. However, I like pissing people off. I like noisy. I like mechanical. I like, sounding like I got a big old supercharger under the hood, Whipple charger, whatever. That's what I like. And, I've been around cars with these. I don't know if you have. I mean, I hardly see it anymore at all. Every car show I go to, I don't, I don't think I've ever heard a gear drive for a very, very long time. Now, the other issue, by the way, that you may or may not know is that these things, create vibration, and when you use it on today's modern vehicles, or you're putting fuel injection on here, like I'm going to do eventually, but not when I first start this up. It's going to have a carburetor. The knock sensor, you can really screw the knock sensor up to where it'll throw out a bunch of, retarded timing. It's going to try to retard the timing on your fully computer controlled electronic ignition system, just because of the fact that you've got a lot of vibration and, quote, knocking happening in your engines, when in fact, it's just nothing but a really noisy drive gear. So anyway, I've had this set for over 20 some years, just lying around. I've always wanted to put it in something because, again, it sounds intimidating. It just, again, it's your personal preference, but for me, it's cool as shit. Okay, I mean it's really freaking cool. That's all I can say. I'm half deaf already, so the fact that I can, hear the engine just kind of whining and whirring and all that kind of stuff is really cool. Now, I'm going to fully admit though that if and when this engine should stay in the car long enough to actually get the fuel injection and stuff swapped over, well then I'm going to put on my true roller, double roller timing chain set. I'm going to put that on there. So, but for now, because I'm going to drop a carburetor on it, I'm going to drop in a distributor that has an igniter on it, and it'll just basically be straight timing based upon where you turn the distributor, etc. I've got it. I'm going to use it. This is part of the Junkyard Dawg philosophy, is I'm just going to be using things that I already have. And even if it happens to be something that is new and improved or whatever you want to say, yeah, I'm going to throw it in there because, again, I've always wanted to have one. I've never had one myself. I've always wanted to drive one around for a little bit. Again, just to piss off the neighbors and or whoever is jealous. Anyway, let's start talking about this. Okay, so this video, the intent and purpose is to show you how I'm putting it on this Ford 302, which, by the way, this is a C8 block, so a 1968 block, has a 302 crank in it. I'm just going to show you how I'm doing it on mine. I'm going to explain a little bit of the unboxing and of the actual gear set itself. You won't be able to hear this until I actually get the car started, but so if you came here for hearing the noise, I'm sorry, this isn't the video. But I am going to show you, because I see so many videos out there for small block Chevy, and maybe we can finally make one for small block Ford, so people can, actually see how to and what will happen when it actually fires up and starts and runs, which we hope it will do. So for now, let's talk about this. So this is a Cloyes timing set, as you can see here on the box. The gear drive, billet steel, heat treated, 3 keyway. The part number is 8-5135. I actually did go to Cloyes' website. They still list it there, but Summit Racing doesn't have it in stock, and it says not available. So I don't know if they quit making it or what, but nonetheless, I have a set here. So when you open it up, here's one-page set of instructions here, which was actually folded up, and inside this bag, this spring retainer here was and still is inside the bag. The bronze thrust washer was inside the bag. I've taken it out, obviously. This is an axle, basically a replacement axle, because you have a choice, okay? I don't know if you can quite see it with the camera. Yeah, you can see. This is the short axle, and this is the long axle right here. And this was over here when I got this set and opened it up for the first time. I've already done a little bit of mocking up, actually, and put it on. And I did that for the purpose so that when it's time to do the video, I don't have to stop and wait so long for the video. But anyway, the point is that I put the long axle in already. So about this system, it has a 3 keyed crank gear, and it's really kind of cool because the straight up or 0 timing is the circle, and if you'll notice, the keyway is actually rounded like a circle. That's kind of cool, huh? I believe the retarded one is the rectangle, and again, the keyway is squared off or rectangle. And the advance is the triangle, and as you can see, it has a tippy-top looking house kind of roof, you know, triangle point for the keyway. So that's kind of cool. That is really cool, actually. So that is the gear there, the crank gear. This is your actual gear that transfers between the two. Now, as I said, I had to replace this axle here from the short to the long in my situation. This is actually the drive gear right here. The bigger one is the drive gear. The smaller one is basically the kickoff gear, is what I call it, because the whole point of this one is when the engine is running, this drive gear, the larger drive gear, is doing all the work, and then when you shut the engine off, sometimes the engine will back up just a little bit, you know, kind of a kickback. And if that should happen, it will try to throw this drive gear out. And the only thing that's going to keep that from happening, of course, is this little idler gear over here on this side. It's going to slam into the crank and cam gear and stay in place, and then when you go to start it again, it's going to throw it back in there and actually run off of the power or the drive gear. Okay, so that's the whole point of this idler gear, is just to keep it from coming off when you turn the dang thing off. Okay, again, the axles, the only place according to the instructions you're going to be replacing the axle is going to be on the driver's side, drive side, which I did. This axle can spin inside here. It doesn't really, you know, key or lock or anything. So it's a free-floating system on both sides. And it uses that spring retainer that you see there to capture itself. So that's how that works. Then you have the upper gear, which is basically very, 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 very simple and straightforward. Has a hole for the dowel and a hole for the cam. That's really all there is to it. There is the dot right there. So circular dot would line up with the circular, you know, crank for straight up, and then you can line that up with the triangle for advance or the rectangle for retard. And it will advance or retard 2 degrees according to this. Now, I'm not going to do it in this video, but when I get this all together, I am actually going to degree the camshaft and make sure that it's, you know, close to where it's supposed to be. And by the way, in my case, this camshaft happens to be a Summit 1790 grind, or part number rather. So that's the flat tappet hydraulic. That's what I'm using in this situation. Okay, so let's see what else. There's instructions in here telling you Again, which one is the idler, which one is the power gear. It's telling you the purpose, as I just explained to you. It tells you how to time it as far as how to use the marks. It tells you the minimum clearance that it will need as far as the power and the idlers, the minimum clearance it will need between the pins and the block, which I'll explain that here in just a little bit. It tells you what you got to do to the timing cover, which I'm going to show you that here in just a minute. And it's saying here on the last one, it's intended for use for a harmonic balancer, not for use for aluminum hub, which, most people are probably not going to be using an aluminum hub unless I would assume you're in some sort of high performance racing or something of that nature. So anyway, that's what's going on there. And then you have the actual installation instructions, and it actually tells you that this thing will fit on a 351 Cleveland, 351 Windsor, and the 260, 221, 289, 302, blah, blah, blah. And it's telling you that, the thrust plate, which is the cam thrust plate on a small block Ford or, whatever, is a certain thickness, considering the early models are 0.217, 351Cs are 0.156, 251. In my case, they are 0.251-ish, approximately. This is a good example of one that was used. You can see that this says here bottom and back, so that means it would have been sitting here like this against the camshaft, and you can actually see that it just barely wears a little bit, or at least in this particular engine it did. And then you can actually see that the wear was all happening on the front, where the timing chain was bumping up against this thrust plate. So that is one of the reasons, I assume, is why they want you to use this bronze thrust plate right here, because it appears, according to history that we can see here, that it's going to rub on the front of it more than it is on the back of it. Okay? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the camera here and kind of go piece by piece as we go back together. But actually, one thing I can do, and by the way, this is, in my opinion, a lot easier to install than a fresh roller, chain type thing, because it just seems to slide right on much easier. And I had to kind of tap this on just a little bit, but it was actually pretty easy, and especially a lot easier for lining up. So anyway, this one here is simple enough. I can do this right now. I'm going to go straight up, which is right there, the nice rounded keyway with a 0, and we'll just slide that right so. And look at that. It just slides right on. There's nothing to that at all. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put this thrust bronze washer bearing, whatever you want to call it, and we're going to put it on the back of this. You can actually see that I already have a little bit of what do you call molly grease there, which is what they say. They say to use some grease, a little bit of molly grease, and then we can put that on there. Now I'm going to have to do this with two hands, so I'm going to actually turn the camera off, or pause it rather, and come back here. Okay, we're back here. You can see that I slid the gear on, and like I said, I put some Molly lube onto that thrust bronze thrust washer, placed it on there. Then I actually come over here and put this on. I got to use two hands because I don't have the plug in the back by the cam. I can push the cam basically right out of the back of the block, so I don't want to do that. So I had to hold my hand back there to install this on here. Okay, so I've got that set in place now. Let's talk real quick about fuel pump eccentric. That's what we want to talk about. Now they're saying in here that they recommend the old-fashioned solid one-piece steel fuel pump eccentric, which I actually do have. So that's not going to be a problem in my case. I mean, really. It says that you can use the traditional two-piece, but or the later style two-piece. It's just that they said that you need to make sure that you use a spacer on there, so that when the inner portion does not clamp against the outer portion to where it becomes basically a one piece. You want to have that outer piece to actually just float around, so to speak. Okay, and you can actually see a little bit of wear was taking place on this, but you can't feel that with your finger or whatnot. But anyway, this is what I actually have. This is what I'm going to use. If I had a two-piece, I would definitely use it. And I would definitely, again, do it the way they say, which is get some sort of spacer back there, washer, whatever, so that you can make sure that when it's all clamped down and tight, that the actual outer ring that can kind of flop around and it can free float properly, okay? Otherwise, you just basically have nothing but a one piece, and what would be the purpose of that, right? So anyway, now what we need to do is we need to take the cam nut itself, or a bolt rather, stick it inside there like so, get this thing over here lined up, and I'm going to be using, let's see, which one is it? Nope, not this one. I'm knocking everything over here. This is why I can't wait to get all this stuff done so I can clean this place up once and for all. Taking too much time here. Alright, I'm going to use the Loctite 271. Put a little bit of that on the threads because I don't want that ever coming loose. I mean, of course, you're going to torque it properly, but that's what I use. There's varying opinions about that, whether you should be using Loctite or not. That's what I've always used. I've never had a problem. And when I go to take the cams apart later, if I ever do, no problem. So that's what I'm going to use. All right. Again, I'm going to stop the camera now and perform that function, and we'll be talking again. Okay, we're back. Let's talk about what I just did here. I used the Loctite 271. Put a little bit on the threads there and screwed this down in there. Now, one thing that I also I'm going to talk about now that I didn't before I started this, but the fuel pump's going to be located over here, and it's going to be sticking its arm over here like so. So this thing's going to be rolling around over here and pushing on it, right? And you know, when you actually get this thing close to being tight, you know, in other words, it's just starting to snug up just a little bit. There's enough slack in here. You can actually rock this thing back and forth surprisingly far. 3/16 in my, you know, application here. This thing will slop back and forth. So what I did was I rocked this thing tight up against the pin, then tighten this down. That way, when it should, for example, I had it rocked the other way, when it comes over here and hits that pump and it starts pumping, it starts trying to push this backwards a little bit to where it goes back to the pin. It doesn't try to loosen this. I know that might be overkill, but I'm just putting that out there, okay? I just think it's important to kind of, you know, these little small details like that. I think those are important, all right? Now, the other thing that I did not do really here on camera, but I already did a long time ago, is before, again, I've mocked this thing up already, okay? I'm just showing you how it's done now. But before I did any of the greasing, before I did any of this stuff and had, you know, tightened it all and all that kind of stuff, before I did all of that, I actually mocked this thing up dry, so to speak. And because what I wanted to do is I wanted to check the clearance between, you know, that thrust washer and this thrust plate, okay? Like right now, I can't move this thing forward or backwards, right? But it's smooth, okay? And the reason why it's kind of turning kind of hard, it's not that it's dragging, it's just that this assembly lube, it's cold in here. It's about maybe 55 degrees in here. And this assembly lube is just, you know, really syrupy, okay? And it's really grabbing a hold of everything. So again, before I actually did grease everything up, I did a dry assembly, and I had that thrust washer back there against that thrust plate, and I actually pushed and pulled to see if there was any kind of clearance, if there was some, you know, clunk kind of situation going on here, and there was, okay? But now that I've actually put the moly grease on both sides of that bronze thrust washer, and put this all in there like I have, tighten this down like I have, you can't feel it. I mean, just maybe barely, but you really can't feel it. All right, the grease is pretty thick, and again, all this stuff is kind of cold right now. When it heats up, it's going to expand, etc. And of course, you're going to have that thinner oil running and everything. This is going to be just fine. Okay, so I've already checked the clearance for that, and it had some. Now this over here actually did not talk about that. So that's one thing that, you know, again, when you're building something like this, you need to think of those things, because it did not talk about, you know, what kind of clearance you need to have back here between, you know, the thrust plate and the thrust bronze bushing and the gear itself. It doesn't talk about that, and it clearly says in here that you can have several different thrust plates. You can have the 351 Cleveland, which is, you know, even thinner than this, and you can have the early model, which I'm assuming they mean the, you know, 221, 260, maybe even 289. It's even thinner yet. I'm not even sure what's going to happen there as far as like what kind of clearance issues you may or may not have, but it just so happens with this 68 block and this .251 thrust plate, it worked, and it had some clearance. And I did not put a gauge on it, a dial indicator, or put a feeler gauge in it, but you know, to me it felt like it was at least, you know, I would say 3 to 4 thousandths at least, maybe even up to 5-6 thousandths. But as you can see right now, I really can't get it to move at all, and I can barely feel it in my hands. But it's such a small amount with that thick grease in there now. You really can't. I can just feel it kind of has a cushion to it, is what I can feel. And again, it is smooth. Okay, so that's one thing to do that you may not find, or that you won't find in here. Okay, so now the next step, I'm going to pause it, and I'm going to drop that on and show you what's going on as far as that mesh. Okay, so we're back again. Here we are now. We've got this installed on there. So basically, I wanted to be straight up. So I have the 0 notch and the circle. There's the dot right there. So straight up and down. Basically, you get these things lined up about as good as you can. And then I find that what you do is you just take and kind of stick this on. I get it on the crank, you know, meshed up as much as you can, and just kind of tilt it towards the cam gear. And then I take a plastic mallet and I start hammering on it right here, and it just falls right in. So it is a little bit of a trick, but I will say this: I think if a guy were doing this without a plastic hammer, it might actually be a little difficult. But for the most part, though, once you get that thing just to kick just a little bit, it just slides right in there. So you can see here that I can, you know, I can pull it out and I can push it in. So according to the instructions, these axles will be riding against your timing cover. And so there's a certain clearance you have to have between the back of the front of the block rather, and the back of the pins. If you're using the short pins, you have to have the clearance for both. If you're using the long pin like I am, all you need is the clearance for the one, because I don't know if you can see it or not back there, but this short pin, I think you can kind of see it, but this is not actually touching the block. It is this long pin right now, and it's hard to see, but that long pin right there is the one that's touching the block. But according to the instructions, what's going to happen is when this thing's running, the gear set assembly is going to kind of move forward, and it's actually going to touch the pin. And that's, I guess, the way it normally is. So that's a normal thing. Now, the other thing, while I'm here, let's talk about this. So you want to get this big idler, or drive, rather, the drive gear, to be solid into the cam and the crank, and then you want to take and you want to check your clearance over here. It needs to be able to, and it's hard to show this in the camera, my hand's in the way, etc., and I'm holding it with one hand. It's a little difficult, but my point that I'm making is that they say you have to have at least 5 thousandths worth of clearance or of motion. This thing should be able to rock up and down, and it's hard to see in the camera, but here in real life I can see it moving quite a bit, up and down. And that's all it says, a minimum of 5 thousandths clearance rocking up and down. And if it can do that, then your clearance here is set really good. If they say in the instructions, if this is too tight, even when this is locked into, being between this gear and that gear, if this is all locked in and it's nice and tight, and this here is also tight, it's going to overheat the gear set, is what they say. So you've got to have this clearance over here, because remember, this one here is the idler, the smaller one, and its only purpose is if when you shut this engine off and this engine wants to roll backward just a little bit, it will kick this out, but it's actually going to catch it, because this here is going to hang on. And then when you go to start it up again, it's going to throw this one back in. And then this one over here is just going to be idling. That's all it's going to be doing. Okay? All right, so let's go over here real quick now and talk about the timing cover here. So the timing cover has to be modified. This timing cover here is a pretty old one. It has the cast-in nub for the timing. So let's see here. We got a C5. So this is 1965 kind of part number here. And so that's how old this timing cover is. This is supposed to go right there, but you got to get rid of it. So I cut it off. So you cut this off, and I did find that I had to grind. I use a special aluminum type die grinding cutter, and you have to make it flat. You got to make it smooth. That's what I found. Because otherwise, this axle pin right there will touch up against that right there, and you will not have the clearance that you need for here. Okay, so that's the next thing I want to talk about. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put the timing cover on kind of temporarily, and then show you what I mean by that clearance. Okay, now real quick, like, just so that you know, one of the things that I did was I put a very thin film of RTV on here, and then I actually took the gasket, I put some studs on here, put the gasket on there, put the thin RTV all over this thing here, and then I took and I placed it on there and just kind of gently clamped it in a few spots, and that way the gasket here would be glued to, or RTV'd to this, and it would be easy for me to take it on and off for trial fitting all the time. Plus, you have to factor the thickness of this gasket for this clearance that I'm about to explain to you. Okay, the only other way that you can take away this gasket thickness, for example, if you have that problem of it being way too much clearance, then you probably aren't going to use this gasket, and you probably are going to use nothing but RTV to be able to get it down to a tighter clearance. Now, I'm right on the edge of almost being bigger than what they want, and again, I'm going to explain that over here. And the other reason why you might be asking why I did RTV is because if you look, let's see, there you go. If you can look right there, this thing here was rusty, and it did a lot of pitting. And just to make sure that that gasket was going to seal, I did RTV all the way around, and you can actually see the RTV just kind of bleeding out of there. I had to actually take a knife and cut it, so it doesn't, cause any blockage or anything. You can see it looks like a nice circle there. But I definitely wanted to make sure it wasn't going to leak. So hang on just a second. I'm going to take this and pause it. I apologize for these videos being long, but I want you guys to know as much information as possible. Okay, we're back again. Now let's talk about the most important clearance that you're going to be dealing with inside of this engine, or any engine really that use this kind of setup. Okay, and that is going to be the drive pin clearance, particularly in my case because my drive pin is longer, than my idler pin. But if I were to use the short pins for both the drive and the idler, then you could be dealing with this on two different sides, okay? But because I have a short pin here, let's see if I can get a light so you can see it. All right, so there's the idler right there. There's the short pin. You can see plenty of room there on up against the block and up against the timing cover as well. Now over here on the other hand, you can see a little bit of clearance. Let's see there, right there. And then you cannot see how much clearance is over there because it's kind of hidden behind this cast piece of the boss for the main right there. Okay. So anyway, what this thing says basically is you want a minimum of 15 thousandths up to 60 thousandths of clearance between the drive pin or the longer pin or both pins if they're the short ones, whatever, between the pin and the block. That's where you want it. So basically what it means is that if you were to take and push this thing all the way forward to where those pins are up against the timing cover, which according to that instruction, that's where they're going to be. According to that instructions, they are always going to ride up against the timing cover, is what they say. Okay, so if that's the case, then your clearance is going to be back here, and you want at least 15 thousandths worth of clearance between that pin when that thing is up against the front of the cover, between that pin and the block, because as this thing heats up, it's going to expand. That's what they're saying. Okay, now you can have up to 60 thousandths of clearance, is what they say. So that's kind of the max that is required. Minimum of 15 to 60 is required. So now when I read that, I say, well, that means if it's more, it's going to be okay, right? That's what I say. They also say that they want at least 90% of the actual gears running in line with each other. And what they mean by that is, they want this gear to be in line with that gear and to be in line with that gear. So this thing starts floating around, see, like this. Like I can push it out here until it goes up against the timing cover. And if you'll notice, it's not quite perfectly in line, but at least 90% of the gear is actually still in contact with this and that, right? So that's the important thing. This is where you really got to pay attention. Now, I actually did put a feeler gauge, and there's no way to get a feeler gauge back here. There's no way to get a feeler gauge back here to tell, if you've got 15 to, 60,000 worth of clearance. So what I did was I pushed it back against the block, and since I got a nice accessible and flat surface here, I stuck the feeler gauges there. And I put in 60 thousandths worth of clearance, and I will have to tell you, it was a sloppy 60 thousandths. In other words, I didn't have any more gauges, really, or I was actually too lazy to take the whole thing apart and build a pack of gauges. But I think I got about 70, maybe 75 thousandths worth of clearance. Remember, this is the Junkyard motor. I'm just looking at here based on my experience of what I, have dealt with in my lifetime. That if this thing comes all the way forward and it's still lined up as much as it is right now, this thing's going to be fine. That's just my opinion. Now, when you look at the instructions, it does have two particular versions of pictures here. Now, this is what I'm kind of doing here. But over here, notice this. This one here says it's got install a screw on the front of the aluminum cover. This is one of the pictures for the instruction. It doesn't say, this is talking about that clearance that I'm telling you, but it doesn't really say when you have to do this. Nowhere in the instructions does it say, go with this one if this, or go with this one if that. I don't see that anywhere. So I'm assuming what's happening here is when you get maybe a Cleveland or you get some situation where you've got a ton of clearance up here in the front, like it's just sloppy, and that, drive right here is going to really, like, it's going to come way too far forward, and it's going to be riding on half the gear or even 75% of the gear, then I'm assuming that's what that picture is all about, is that you have to actually, you know, find yourself a spot, drill a hole here, and install a screw with a certain size head on it to, once again, finally get yourself to when it, you know, when that screw's in place, it's all said and done that you have at least 15 thousandths to 60 thousandths of clearance between the pin and the block. That's what I'm assuming those instructions are saying, because they do not actually say when to use the left side, when to use the right side. Okay? So, I was actually thinking a little bit there for a little while that, hey, maybe I should put a steel screw in, because, you know, the pin is capable of actually rolling freely, you know, and it will rub on the aluminum, you know, timing cover. But then again, the instruction also says that it will always do that, and so since it always does that, I'm assuming that they have examples out there where this is always happening and they're having no problems. Plus, not only that, but you got, you know, oil spraying around all over inside there at all times. I don't know. I'm just not worried about it. But and besides that, the main thing that stopped me, honestly, is the fact that I'm trying to sit here thinking, well, what kind of screw am I going to be able to find, a screw head that I'm going to be able to find that when I put it in there, because you can see, even if I push this all the way back and I stab a screwdriver in there and push it all the way back to pin and everything until it hit the block, whatever kind of screw head I'm going to find that fits in there nice and flat and actually is thin enough to allow that 15 thousandths minimum clearance, I don't know what screw that's going to be. That's the biggest holdup as to why I am not actually putting a screw in here, because, again, if I do that, I really think that now I'm going to have to grind away at that screw, but then that's going to weaken the screw, where the screw could possibly break the head off and, you know, fall out after this thing gets to slamming against it or rubbing against. I don't know. But I'm going to go ahead and, just based upon how much surface area these gears are lined up, I'm going to call that 90%. Yeah, it's definitely 90% on to the gears. This is definitely more than enough clearance. I mean, yeah, you can hear it clicking, right? But at the same time, though it's clicking back and forth, I mean, according to this, when it starts up, it's going to come up out there and it's going to ride up against there. The pin itself really shouldn't be spinning. It's the actual gear that should be spinning on that axle pin. Because I can tell you right now, if this locks up onto that pin and this does start spinning, not only is it going to wear a hole in there, I mean, it's going to do a lot of damage to these tie bars, basically. So, once again, this video is getting pathetically long. I don't know how. Time just goes by so fast when I try to make these videos. And trust me, I do not do this intentionally. I just really want to give you guys the most possible information. And I definitely don't want to break it up into part 1, 2, 3, and 4 that much. But I definitely want you guys to get as much information as possible. And I guess back onto the subject here, I could take off that gasket, and that would definitely close up this gap here and probably give me under 60 thousandths of clearance. But then, based upon the fact that I'm maybe 10 thousandths over that, I'm not concerned at all. I'm going to keep that gasket on there, and this is how we're going to run it. So, there you go. This is and has been a review of the Cloyes 5135 timing set gear drive. It is noisy, by the way, and we're going to find out just how noisy, how to set it up, how to get it installed onto your small block Ford. Your application may be different, though, because if you've got a Cleveland, if you've got a Windsor, if you've got a 289, you got something else that's different than this, it could be totally different. But this is what happened with mine. This is how easy it was, and I'm calling it easy, even though there was some things I had to think about. But it was pretty easy. It went on just, rather effectively, And now we're going to have fun actually starting it up and running it here, hopefully by this summer. So there you go. That is the review. Like, subscribe. Please like. I mean, I'm putting a lot of effort and time into these, and again, I'm doing this because I just want people to have that information, and especially you and I both know it. I don't care who you are and what brand you like, but you and I both know small block Ford is one of the neglected things out there, although they are getting a little better somewhat. But no. You can't find this kind of stuff on small block Ford stuff, so I'm definitely trying to do this to make up for some of the lacking that we're seeing out there, because you can find everything with small block Chevy. Everything. And big block Chevy. So, all right. Thanks again. I'll talk to you later.